A June 30th deadline for the ACC to figure out the situation with Florida State and Clemson? I can't see it.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, coaching carousel, the portal. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 of bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get yourself started. Ohio State has got quarterback questions. Yeah, we'll hear from Jay Stevens of Locked On Buckeyes later. And two names in the portal, of which there are going to be many, many more, that are going to play in the Power Four next year. Probably in the SEC. All coming up on today's show. But we start with Florida State and Clemson. I heard the Locked On ACC guys talking about this, Kenton and Alex Dono, and the discussion was centering around June 30th and the deadline, and could that be when Florida State and Clemson leave, and would they leave after that and put the ACC in trouble because if they left before, then they'd be under the 14-team number, and then ESPN could get involved and do something nefarious with the television contract and whatnot. I don't see that happening. I don't see that coming to fruition in the sense that Florida State and Clemson say, well, you better do this or we're just going to leave at this time. I think Florida State and Clemson are trying to plan for 2025. Because if you leave the ACC for 2024, number one, there's no guarantee a conference is going to pick you up right away. I've talked about that on this show with Chris Gordy of Locked On SEC before, that SEC's appetite for expansion might not be unlimited. Now, I think if the Big Ten were smart, they'd get Florida State and Clemson if they were available, but they'd play the same schedule. They're not going to redo everyone's schedule. You can't get Florida State and Clemson into the Big Ten by 2024. I don't know that I've actually talked about this before, and as I thought about what to discuss on today's show, I realized I don't think I've really made that clear on past shows, that you cannot look at Florida State and Clemson's football schedule for 2024 and completely restructure it. You cannot. You're not putting them into the Big Ten and redoing everybody's schedule. You've already started ticket sales. You've already had broadcast arrangements. You've already had logistics begin to get coordinated by all these universities. It's too late in the process. You're not doing that. So any threat that they would make about June 30th or July 1st and say we could leave by this time or that time or whatever, that's not going to come into play. I just can't see it because there would be too much restructuring. And I think they're trying to get out as soon as possible, but I think that as soon as possible is 2025. Because if you're not a part of the ACC, what if the Big Ten and the SEC decide, no, we can't have you for 2024? You're going to play the whole year as an independent? You're gonna play an ACC schedule. Like, that's where there would be absolutely, positively no material benefit for Florida State and Clemson to leave the ACC for 2024. There wouldn't be. There wouldn't be, because I don't think you can guarantee you'd have a home and therefore a conference championship game to play in. You would essentially be in Notre Dame's situation, which has no possibility of getting a first round bye in the 12-team playoff, which starts this year. Let's not forget that. We're going to have it for 2 years, and then we'll probably get to the 14-team playoff once that all gets finalized and announced and whatnot come 2026 and beyond. But you're trying to ensure that your teams, which are the two favorites in the ACC, might I remind you, lest I get distracted and talk about actual football here in this particular segment, but Clemson and Florida State are the betting favorites to make the ACC title game. Now, I don't think you can overlook Miami. Cam Ward, oh boy, he looked really good in Miami's spring game. He looked like the best version of Cam Ward in many respects. And when he makes a big-time throw, he's an NFL sort of guy. The key is getting him to do it more consistently. We'll see if that's able to play out. But Miami could be in that running. NC State is not a team that you can overlook in the ACC. I've sung their praises on this show. Boy, they showed a lot in that spring game. They might have the weapons with Grayson McCall, all of that to get there. But even with those teams in the running and legitimate contenders to make the ACC title game, one of Florida State or Clemson are going to get there. You have to think that as a program, as a head coach, as an athletic director. You have to believe that the landscape of the conference that is probably fourth in terms of depth for college football right now is one where you're going to get into the conference championship game. You have to be assuming that. And I'm assuming that at least one of them is getting in. And so leaving the league, playing essentially as an independent, the way Notre Dame does, playing all these ACC teams, but then not getting the benefit and giving the automatic berth to somebody else does nothing for you. It does absolutely nothing for you. It doesn't change your realignment calculus. It doesn't help your football team in the short term. It doesn't help your program. It's not good for your coaches. It's not good for your fans either, because you're then reliant upon getting an at-large berth in a conference that is seen, I think correctly, as the fourth best for football in college football. You've got the SEC and the Big Ten. You put them in whatever order you want. It's probably the SEC one and the Big Ten too, but the Big Ten just loaded up, of course, with USC, Oregon, Washington, and UCLA won't be very good. But those are three teams that are going to have winning records this year. Oregon, USC, and Washington. The SEC, of course, has added Oklahoma and Texas. Those are clearly the top two. But then you go to the Big 12 and you realize, yeah, their depth of teams, they might not have the high-end teams that you've got in the ACC with Florida State especially. But when you go down the list, if you compare like the top four in the Big 12, the top four to the ACC, you probably lean ACC. But if you go to like the next four or the next five teams from there, I'm almost surely going to go with what you've got in the Big 12. Is it competitive? Yeah, sure. It's close. But the competitive depth in the Big 12 is really, really strong. So being in that situation, if you're Florida State and Clemson, is where you've got to keep yourselves for now. And you want to try to get out by next year, which is why I don't see a deadline being imposed or an ultimatum being given to the ACC. You have to give us this settlement by this amount of time. Like, guys, just move on. I talked about this last week on the show. It's the Ocean's 11 scene where Ruben and Casey Affleck's character Virgil Malloy are, messing with Benedict's security guys, and they've got the van. He's going, "Oh, no, I'm sorry. Oh," and Ruben goes, "Enough monkey business. Just do it already. Just do it. Just do it so everybody else can move on with their lives and we can know what the situation will be. Say, this will be your last year in the ACC. It'll feel somewhat like the Pac-12 of last year, but frankly, your best chance of survival, if you're the ACC, is getting to that settlement position. Because the longer you make other schools wait, the more likely it is that they want to jump ship, that they would want to go elsewhere. Just get to a dollar amount. And look, I don't know the legal intricacies of how to negotiate a settlement of that caliber. Maybe I'll call my uncle and ask him. He's worked on, not in this particular realm, but he's a lawyer and has worked on this stuff. Maybe I'll call him for advice because I literally don't know. But what I do know, based on recent history, Colorado in the Pac-12, for instance, schools will get antsy. And I know that the rest of us want to be able to just have clarity and certainty about what the future is actually going to hold. Because right now, we don't know. We don't know where they would end up. But I think the most likely outcome is Florida State and Clemson leave the ACC, join the Big Ten. That's probably a little bit more likely than the SEC, but not clear entirely at this point in time. Everybody else stays put. And I think that remaining ACC is at the very least comparable to what you currently have in the Big 12, especially if Miami with Mario Cristobal can get themselves into the power they're capable of being with their recruiting footprint and how Cristobal recruits and his staff. They do such a great job with that. If they become your flagship program, that's comparable to the Big 12. It absolutely is. And, maybe ESPN, this is another theory that's been thrown out there. It sounds a little conspiratorial. I don't know that it is, but ESPN wants Florida State and Clemson into the SEC because then they don't lose any money there since they're the sole media rights holder and they still get to have the valuable products television-wise that are Florida State and Clemson. I don't think it's crazy. I don't think it's a ridiculous notion. What is ridiculous is it just continues to go on. I don't think there's going to be a deadline because for this year, everything is set. Clemson and Florida State will play as members of the ACC. They're going to try to get out for next year. So I don't think a deadline is going to have a huge factor because there's no deadline for when you would leave by 2025. That can take place That can take place anytime. There's going to be so much money involved, even if the exit fees, go up at this point in time or that point in time. It's not going to matter. They're either going to be willing to pay an obscene amount of money to leave the ACC, or they're not. And I hope we can just get some resolution on this rather quickly. Ohio State doesn't have resolution on who their quarterback's going to be, which is news to me, but that's the way it is right now. Do you know how it is over at FanDuel? It's great. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 whether you win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. So ask yourself this question: what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make your first bet an automatic win. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. This episode also brought to you by Monopoly Go. So, I've been told I'm a competitive person. This is objectively true. So I have a competitive side. My competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is you can mess around with your friends as well. It's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Whether you want to play with your friends, against your friends, or both, you can do it all. Download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Go check out Monopoly Go today. Quarterback questions at Ohio State. Jay Stevens thinks so. Locked On Ohio State Buckeyes joining me here on the show. Before we get to other spring game takeaways, Jay, it feels like the big news coming out of the showcase that the Buckeyes put on display with Chip Kelly, of course, as the offensive coordinator, is that there are more questions than answers at quarterback. Your thoughts?
Yeah. More questions than answers right now. That's a good way to put it. I do think the quarterback situation at Ohio State, it's different than last year, to where at this time last year, Kyle McCord was the starter in the spring game. His backup, Devin Brown, was hurt, didn't play in the spring game, and Devin Brown had to recover from an injury throughout about a month and a half after spring practice concluded. So it's a little bit different when all five of your quarterbacks right now are healthy. The guys that are in contention to start for the Buckeyes in the fall, they're healthy, they're competing, and one of them is a transfer, a five-star that came from Alabama, true freshman quarterback in Julian Sand. You got a transfer in Will Howard from Kansas State. You got Devin Brown, who's been there for a long time. Then you got Lincoln Kienholz and Aaron Nolan that are guys on the roster, but nobody thinks Kienholz or Aaron Nolan have a realistic opportunity to start this year, and I don't think it's a problem or a bad thing for their careers. I do wonder, though, what do Chip Kelly and Ryan Day value more? Is it more athleticism and ability to run, taking away a little bit in the passing game, or is it Ryan Day's offense where Ryan Day wants an emphasis on the arm? Day didn't run a lot at all, really. Kelly's going to run a little bit, so it's more emphasis on the arm and then running a little bit more than normal. Where do the coaches stand right now? They ran a whole lot in that spring game, so I think they're going to put a little more emphasis on the athleticism and ability to run. But I know Day doesn't want to take away from the passing game either and just have a guy who out there who can't make all the throws because he's really athletic. All that is to say, after the spring game, I don't really know who has the upper hand right now, because the coaches, no matter what they saw, we really didn't see one guy show that he is head and shoulders above everybody else. So we're going into the summer like we did last year, not sure who QB1's going to be.
Yeah, and it's a curious situation because Will Howard was going to go to USC. Miller Moss scared him off, and Moss is, I presume, going to be the starter over there at USC. They brought in a transfer, Jaden Mayava, from UNLV, but I expect that to be Miller Moss's job. And so Howard ends up at Ohio State. And when you bring in a guy who is that experienced, I think the only quarterback I can think of in the last couple of years who has transferred to a power school and ended up being a backup after starting elsewhere was Spencer Sanders, who was a starter at Oklahoma State He went to Ole Miss. He was not the starter. That was Jackson Dart's team, and it'll be Jackson Dart's team once again this year. And Sanders, I'm pretty sure, is out of eligibility now. So maybe that comes to fruition here with the Will Howard, but this feels like it has changed from the feeling of a month ago or 2 months ago, where you would have assumed, Will Howard is going to start at Ohio State. But is there really something to the idea that Will Howard doesn't start at Ohio State this year?
Oh, yeah. I ain't got to wait a little bit to respond to that one, Spencer. Absolutely. There is a realistic opportunity that the Kansas State transfer won the Big 12 Conference Championship, beat TCU in that Big 12 championship game, does not start at Ohio State. And I don't think that's a knock on him as a player. And that's not saying that he's not talented. That is just showing that the talent at Ohio State is so high right now that even a true freshman quarterback has a realistic opportunity to win the job over a seasoned quarterback, really experienced guy in Howard. Let's not forget Devin Brown. I know he is still here. I know he has played very little football in his career at Ohio State. I know last year he got on the field multiple times, got hurt, I think, before the season, got hurt in the season multiple times. And so he's a guy that is not only trying to win the job, also trying to have a healthy offseason, as he just came off of an injury in the Cotton Bowl. So there's so many different angles, and I think Brown and Sayin are realistic opportunities, realistic guys that can win the job over Will Howard. Hearing Julian Sayin and saying Ryan Day is saying that Sayin is in the mix to be a quarterback and win the battle, that was not something I would expect right now this time of year, but that actually happened prior to the spring game. So I'm sitting here in my head like, could it be Sayin? Yeah, but he has to show you a lot. It's hard to trust a guy that young on a big stage like Ohio State. Does Devin Brown have an opportunity to win? Yes, but he also has to show you a lot, and you have to hope that he's healthy. But this situation for Ohio State, in the quarterback situation, a lot of teams around the country would love to have a room with this talent, from freshman all the way to the most experienced guy in Will Howard at their school.
Yeah, it's definitely the deepest quarterback room, and I've said multiple times on the show before, and still contend as the transfer portal opens today when this show is airing, one of these guys has got to leave, right? Like at least one, it feels like, is going to seek an opportunity elsewhere. Between the stacked number of quarterbacks and the struggle for playing time there and the caliber of guys in the room, I feel like at least one of these guys is leaving. Who do you think that would be?
Ooh, you got to put me on the spot. So there's two names that come to mind, and Ohio State fans may think I am crazy for saying this. Devin Brown and Lincoln Kienholz are two guys in my mind that if at some point right now, even though Brown might be in the mix, if he doesn't have some type of concrete feeling that he is going to be possibly the guy, and you're competing with these other two, do you really want to allow yourself to lose the battle once again, back-to-back seasons, and lose a year of eligibility, potentially, depending on how many games you end up playing, to where you could go somewhere else and start and be a really good player and show everybody why you were recruited to Ohio State, why you were in contention to win QB1 and Columbus 2 years in a row. Just happened to be that the Buckeyes went out and got somebody else. I think if Ryan Day trusted Devin Brown to win the job at the end of last year, he probably wouldn't have gone out there and gotten Will Howard. But also, with Brown being talented but also injured twice in the same season, Day has to think, he might be talented enough to win the job. Is he durable enough to last the entire season? These are thoughts going through Ryan Day's head. But Kienholz is another one. I believe he redshirted last year, so he has 4 more years to play. But I also think he is a guy, now maybe having to go down a little bit to start this year, but he is a guy that can come in, go to a new situation, and make some noise at a different school. I am also high on Kienholz. I really like him. I think he's really good. It's going to take him a couple years, 2 or 3 years, to just get up to speed with the level of college football, the play that is there, which is fine. I don't think Aaron Nolan's going anywhere. I think that him and Sayin being in the same class, and Sayin being in the mix to be a starting quarterback for Ohio State helps Aaron Nolan realizing, one, he's going to redshirt, but also realizing I am not competing with anybody in my class to get on the field. That guy's already ahead of me. So they're in the same class, yes, but I think Sayin has a better chance to get on the field this year than Aaron Nolan, which is why there's kind of a separator between Nolan and Sayin. It's weird, man. I don't like talking quarterbacks leaving, but I think Brown.
It's a reality. It's just the reality. Options are going to be available. Like,
yes.
If would you rather be a fifth string quarterback at Ohio State or a first string quarterback at Memphis? Just to pick a random G5 out there as an option. And certainly these guys, when you look at their recruiting profiles, are all talented enough to be in that sort of conversation where they could go to maybe a high level group of 5 or a lower level Power 4 school and maybe be the most talented quarterback in that room right away. I want to get you out of here on a non-quarterback point, Jay. When you watched Ohio State's spring game on Saturday, what was your other number one takeaway after the quarterback situation?
The defense is going to be fine. The defense has no issues. The defense will be fine. The secondary is deep. I know there's a lot of angles to the defensive part here, but the secondary is deep. They might be too deep at guys that can play this year. That's how good they are at both corner spots, the nickel corner spot and also the 2 safety spots. They're going to be fine. They have guys coming in that are walk-ons that would go other places and be guys that could get in the rotation in the secondary. That's how talented this team is right now. Up front, you got guys like Tui Malowau and Tyleik Williams and Jack Sawyer. Ty Hamilton, don't forget him. Really good, solid defensive tackle. I do believe in a year from now he will get drafted into the National Football League. But backing them up, guys like Hero Kanu and Kenyatta Jackson Jr. and Caden Curry, they're going to be fine. And the versatility with the linebackers, with Sonny Styles moving from safety to linebacker, CJ Hicks, a third-year guy, expected to either start or get a lot of play at linebacker. Then Cody Simon, the seasoned vet of that unit. I do believe the defense will be fine. Got to say one more thing here, Spencer. Defense is fine. I can't say the same thing about the offensive line. I'll leave it there.
Interesting times in Columbus, to say the least, for the Big Ten favorite, Ohio State Buckeyes. If you want to know more, Jay Stevens, Locked On Buckeyes, joining me here on today's show. Jay, thank you so much.
Really appreciated it.
So the portal is officially open. Now, lots of names are going to be in it. Here are 2 that you need to be aware of. Today's episode of Locked On College Football is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. That's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. The portal's open. We already know some names that are in the portal. We'll learn of more names that'll enter the transfer portal. Here are 2 that are going to start at Power 4 institutions next year. Let's start with Tre'Quon Fegans. So Tre'Quon Fegans was a class of 2022 recruit. Began his career at the University of Alabama. And didn't do a whole heck of a lot there. He went to USC this past offseason, and he's in the transfer portal again. USC's had a couple of defensive defections on that side of the ball because they've brought in significant talent on that side of the ball. I've said many times, I really like what USC has done in the transfer portal this offseason. Bet them over 7.5 while you can. Anyway, Tre'Quon Fegans is a guy that was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school. He's got a brother who I'll talk about in a moment, but this guy's going to end up in the SEC. I don't see any other dots in which I could connect that lead me to think that Fegans will end up anywhere other than playing in the SEC. He's a native of the state of Alabama. He was once upon a time playing for the University of Alabama. Now, I've heard that Auburn could be in the mix here. Nothing is solidified. You'd have to put Alabama in the mix. You absolutely would, for 3 reasons. Number 1, he knows what it's like to be there, and he left in theory because of playing time, but you got a new staff, you got new defensive coaches over there. Number 2, he is from the state of Alabama. So if he wants to go home, there are, last time I checked, 2 SEC schools in that state that you could go play for, Auburn or Alabama. And number 3 is his teammate from this past season, Damani Jackson, has already transferred to the Crimson Tide. That's a trifecta of factors in which you could see the stars aligning for Tre'Quon Fegans to end up with Alabama. But is Auburn going to be in the mix? Sure. Because maybe he left Alabama because he decided, you know what, this is just not the school for me. I'm not about the Scarlet A. I don't like the colors. I doubt that's the actual reason there. But this is a guy who physically has got the tools and needs the opportunity to showcase what he's capable of. Hasn't fully been given that. He played for USC this past year. He registered 9 total tackles, and that was just not a great defensive staff. I don't blame him for wanting a better or a different situation at the very least. But the Damani Jackson element is interesting because those guys were playing together this past season. Maybe he wants to follow his teammate to go be a member of the Crimson Tide. But Hugh Freeze has been very open about the fact that the defensive line is going to be an emphasis for them in the transfer portal, that they want to go and get sorts of players, all sorts of players there. Do you think if someone comes available in the secondary who he feels is a starting caliber guy, he's just going to turn him away? No, I don't think so. I don't think Auburn's transfer portal desires are limited to the defensive line. That's just where Hugh Freeze said the focus is going to be. So here's the other interesting component. Tre'Quon Fegans is his younger brother. He's a very highly rated 4-star safety in the class of 2025. He's got all sorts of SEC offers. Could those 2 guys be a package deal? I've seen crazier things happen before where one guy would commit via the portal now and you get a guarantee that his brother shows up in the future. Remember, this is the player empowerment era where players oftentimes go into the transfer portal and say, hey, what can you do for me? Not what can I do for you? I'm just saying. I throw it out there. Here's another SEC school. And again, all these reasons are why I'm saying this guy's going to go play in the SEC and he's going to go start somewhere. He just needs the opportunity to do so. Do you know who recruited him originally to the University of Alabama? I couldn't possibly expect you to know that. That would be an unreasonable expectation on my part for you to know who recruited Tre'Quon Fegans out of high school and got him originally to commit to the University of Alabama, which, by the way, historically, Nick Saban and defensive backs, there's a little bit of a track record there of him doing very well. So if Nick Saban was after a blue chip DB recruit, yeah, I think there's plenty of potential in that individual player. But the guy who recruited him is Travaris Robinson. Do you know where he's at now? Do you know who that is? He was on Nick Saban's staff for quite a while. Saban retires, and Robinson goes to, drum roll please, the University of Georgia. So when I think about where Fegans could end up and where his brother could end up as a result, certainly that's a bargaining chip in the recruiting world. I mean, this is a 2 birds with 1 stone sort of situation. If you land the older brother and you end up getting the younger brother, well, suddenly you've got a bunch of talented DBs, or at least 2, in your defensive backfield. And these are places, particularly Alabama and Georgia, that have placed a pretty high priority and churned out a lot of NFL talent in their secondaries. So those are the schools that I would watch for. Auburn is a name to watch. Alabama is a name to watch. Georgia, with the Travaris Robinson connection, that is a name to watch as well. Let's go to player number 2 in this particular segment. Philip Blidi has been around college football for a long time, a very, very long time, some would say. He was at Indiana this past year. Before that, he was at Texas Tech. Do you know how long he's been in college football? This is year 5. He's one of those guys. They're fewer and further between than they used to be once upon a time. But this is a guy who has got another year of eligibility. His 5th year playing along the defensive line, you don't find guys like that. And I think that's a particularly strong advantage when you're dealing with someone in the trenches. Because you've got that extra year, whereas other guys do not. Or if you're going up against true freshmen or redshirt sophomores, whomever you're battling out there on the offensive and defensive line. He's a defensive lineman himself. He's had 5 years now to be in a college weight room. That's a long time to build yourself up. You are as physically mature as you can possibly be. Now, is he the highest end talent you could possibly find in college football? Perhaps not. Or he'd probably be going to the NFL draft. But how many times do you find a fifth-year defensive lineman who's only been at Power 4 institutions? He began his career at Texas Tech. He transferred to Indiana, and he's got quite the offer list. That time that he has spent playing the sport has drawn some eyeballs here. So here's a list of visits that he has taken or is planning to take. Auburn, once again, on the list. No surprise, because Hugh Freeze has said very openly, we want defensive linemen in the transfer portal. So no surprise, he's going after Philip Blidi here. Washington, a position I talked about, or a school rather, that I talked about on yesterday's show. They need help all over the place, including, but not limited to, the defensive line. And I think Washington and Alabama, as I discussed to begin yesterday's show, could be very active in this spring transfer portal window. Amongst the kind of big names, heavy hitters on the recruiting trail in this spring transfer portal window, I think Alabama and Washington could be major players, especially the Crimson Tide. But he's visited Washington, Auburn, LSU, and he's expected to get out to Oklahoma this week for the spring game. Well, that's a pretty loaded lineup of visitors right there. Whether or not the NFL has interest in him at a high level, he's clearly someone who, it appears, would want to go somewhere where he can up his draft stock. Are all those places, locations in which you can do that? Yeah, they absolutely are. So these are two guys who we know are going to be in the transfer portal. Tre'Quon Fegans, Philip Blidi. Remember those names because they're going to pop out of the portal and they're going to end up, in all likelihood, in the SEC. Names to keep an eye on. The transfer portal, it be wildin', and it's only going to get, they say, crazier. We shall see. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.